this is where they live.
This is where they live.
All that like Illuminati, stuff like that, like trafficking, high-level James Bond stuff. If it was gonna happen anywhere, it would be here. Ivar, Whitley, Cahuenga. Hollywood has a lot of very interesting street names, and today we're going to meet a guy who knows all about them. So we've hooked up here with Mark of LA Street Names. What is LA Street Names?
LA Street Names is a personal passion project of mine that I started working on in 2020. And it does exactly what it says on the tin. It is me researching and writing about the origins of street names across Los Angeles, not just Los Angeles City, but the entire county, from Pomona to Long Beach to Santa Clarita and so forth.
And how many street names is that?
As of right now, I'm approaching 1,800 that I've finished, but that's out of 50,000 that exist across the county. So I will never be finished, but hopefully I will make a dent in the full picture at some point.
And leave the work for the next generation of
Yes, exactly.
street name enthusiasts. Well, let's go check some out.
All right.
Yeah.
This is actually one of the few instances where you still have the two signs on one pole. The city of Los Angeles, in order to save money at some point, they started removing the dual signs per pole. So in most intersections, you'll notice there's only one sign on a pole. But in the old days, it used to be like this regularly, but I guess in this case, there was no other place to put Jaeger Place.
So I bet you discover all sorts of little things about Los Angeles from doing this that people don't know, or just little things like a sign.
Oh yeah, well, I mean, that's the kind of the constantly surprising thing about this research, is finding all the connections.
Are there any streets where you're looking at it and you get the impression that they're just out of ideas at this point, or they're kind of lazily named, or?
Sure, I mean, a lot of time, whenever you see a Maple Drive or Elm Street, people say, well, let's just name things for trees. In fact, H.J. Whitley named a lot of streets here after trees. Only a couple of them have kept their names, like Sycamore. But he had a Palm Street, which is now Las Palmas, because there was already a Palm Street or Palm Avenue elsewhere in Los Angeles. So again, you've got when Hollywood was acquired by the city of LA, I think it was 1910, you had to get rid of a lot of duplicate street names. But yeah, clearly a lot of people it wasn't on their mind when they were laying out. They just wanted to sell lots and make money, and so they call a street, the Hillside Drive or something like that. Sounded nice. The more fun is when it's an actual person's name, a developer's name, or the name of a loved one of theirs, or the hometown they came from, because then for me it's more about the detective work and more about solving the mystery, and that's where the true enjoyment of this project lies.
So we've come now to Hightower Street. Well, what's the story on this?
I think it's called Hightower Drive. In fact, it's
Hightower Drive.
So we're on Hightower Drive. So this development was laid out in 1922 by a fellow named Fred Gallagher. This was a 5-acre undeveloped property, one of the last spots in Hollywood that had not yet been developed because it's so hilly. Nobody knew what to do with this big hilly piece of land. So Fred Gallagher got a number of investors together to buy this land, and they came up with the ingenious idea of building the houses at the top accessible only through pedestrian streets and this campanile-like elevator shaft. And so they called it Hightower Drive. It was named Hightower Drive right there in 1922.
So this is actually an elevator here.
So Fred Gallagher might have actually designed the elevator. He was not an architect. There was no architect of record that I could find. The houses that you see around it were added in the 1930s by an Armenian-American architect named Carl Kay. He was the one who actually built all the wonderful Art Deco buildings on either side of the elevator shaft. So that's why the elevator shaft really doesn't fit in with the Art Deco look, because that was done in 1922 before Art Deco really took over Hollywood. And I've been in the elevator a long time ago. It's not tiny, but it's not big enough, I think, to haul a piano up, for instance.
Yeah, I always think about when I'm up here, how much of a pain it must be to move when somebody needs to move here.
Right.
Up that, just the stairs have this incline. It's just really tough.
Yeah, I mean, they must have had some way in getting furniture down through the elevator. A long time ago, I had a friend who lived at the top right there. He had a party at his house, and it's a amazingly small space. There's actually a really nice big outdoor space that's effectively the roof of the unit below him. But the actual apartment itself was pretty dinky.
And this was in The Long Goodbye?
Yes, that's right.
Yeah.
Elliot Gould's character in the Robert Altman film lived in the top left.
Meet Philip Marlowe.
Marlowe? Marlowe. Marlowe. Your name, Marlowe?
Well, I've taken tour groups up there before because Kurt Cobain used to live up there.
That's right.
And the house is now abandoned, and you can hop the fence and walk around and explore, and not recommending anybody does that, but
Yeah.
it could be done.
Don't try this at home. Don't try this at
At Kurt Cobain's home. Yeah. Mark, how did you come up with this project?
Well, in 2010, I was working as a freelance writer for a company that did DVD extras, and one of the shows that they were hired to work on was this HBO drama called Treme, which was about New Orleans. And so I was hired to write about all the little New Orleanian stuff that's mentioned or shown in the show. And one of the things I was writing about was locations, and I was given a book called Frenchmen Desire Good Children, which takes its name from 3 New Orleans streets, and it's all about the wacky street names of New Orleans and how they tell the history of that city. And so I thought, wouldn't it be great if someone did that for Los Angeles? And then I thought, wouldn't it be great if I did that for Los Angeles? And it took me 10 years to finally get around to doing it. It was basically a lockdown project in 2020. But 4 years later, here we are. I'm still working on it.
We need to go that way, though, right, to get to Paramount Drive?
That's a good question.
Let's look it up.
Let me look at it a little.
Do you feel like you have a better understanding of geography or how the city's laid out or anything like that from doing this? Or are they all just names that rattle around in your head?
Well, it's funny because when I was talking about the street names that are related to each other, often I can find my way through a neighborhood, sort of as a mnemonic device. Like, oh, that's right, this is named for H.J. Whitley's daughter, Grace, so I know that the Whitley Drive must be right after this because, and so on and so forth. Like, you start kind of finding your way through certain areas. It sounds wacky, but these long-forgotten Angelenos kind of become like celebrities for me. So when I see their name on a sign, I'm like, oh yeah, I know you. I've written about you. I know all the scandals in your life and all the tragedies. And so it actually makes driving through LA slightly more bearable.
Been a tour guide for many years.
Right.
And I know just like when I'll cruise down the Sunset Strip, I'll just think like, oh, that happened there, and that was this, and they almost become like your friends.
Yeah,
like,
yeah.
Oh yeah, that's where Jim dropped his pants on stage. Yeah, Lizard King, crazy guy,
Yeah, no, I love LA history. LA has a bad reputation, perhaps somewhat well-earned, for burying its history. And for a lot of people who come in here, they're just thinking about themselves and their own careers and whatever, and they're not really that interested in paying attention to the history of Los Angeles, much less preserving it or acting as stewards. But, hopefully as time goes by, we will become more like a London or a Paris when you start realizing that things are actually getting pretty old here, finally. We're now dealing with a lot of stuff that's 100 years old. A lot of these neighborhoods were built up in the 1920s, so we're talking about 100-year-old houses left and right. And back in the 80s, that wasn't such a big deal. They were only 60-year-old houses, and who cares? But once you hit the century mark, I think people start paying more attention to it. There's something about that number, 100 years, that really kind of feels more magical and more important.
And it all comes back around.
It all comes back around. And speaking of which, we're going, I found where Paramount Drive is.
It really is a nice database. So when you do this exploring, do you do it on foot or you just kind of look at Google Maps, Thomas Guide?
Yeah, I'm pretty much a office traveler. Bit hard to talk when you're walking uphill.
Yeah. That spring weather, really.
Yeah, I know. I'm glad I took an allergy pill. Otherwise, I'd be like, oh, it's going away. Someone was pretty funny. They put up a fake sign called Rue Paramount.
Now we've come to Paramount Drive.
Yes.
That's not the real street sign up there, but this is really called Paramount Drive. Now down the street, there is a Paramount Pictures movie studio. Are the two related?
In fact, they are, and this is kind of a funny story. So we were just in Hightower Drive. So the Hightower development, AKA Hollywood Highland Avenue tract, was run by Fred Gallagher. And as a promotional gimmick, he decided to hold a contest in local newspapers in late 1922 for a Name That Tract and Name That Street. A fellow named Herman McCroskey, who suggested for the Name That Street portion of this contest, Paramount Drive. And he wrote a very long-winded, boring treatise that was published in the newspaper about the name Paramount and what it means. It means the top of the top, the cream of the crop, whatever you want to call it. What he didn't divulge was that he actually worked for Paramount Pictures. And I found this out because I knew he worked later. You know, he's got an unusual name, Herman Emerson McCroskey, pretty easy to Google. So he became a Paramount executive. But the question I had was whether in 1922 he was already working for Paramount Pictures. So believe it or not, he had his papers with the University of Washington. I contacted them and I said, can you find me any proof that Herman Emerson McCroskey worked for Paramount Pictures before 1922? And they said, yes, here's rock solid proof that he was hired in 1919. So he was already at Paramount for 3 years when he suggested Paramount as a nice name, you know, indicating the cream of the crop. But in fact, it was covert advertising for his very own employer.
Street's still here, Paramount's still here. Last movie studio left in Hollywood.
That's right.
So it's almost an appropriate name. That harkens back to some history that wasn't even made yet when they named the street.
That's right.
So we've come now here to Highland Avenue is behind us. So Mark, I think I know the story of this one. This is a street that goes uphill, therefore Highland, right?
Well, you know, theoretically that might be true, but the story that sounds too good to be true, but I think actually is true, is that it was named for a woman, Highland Mary Price. Now, she was a real woman, the first person to be interred in Hollywood Cemetery. So she was buried there in 1901. If she really was the first person interred there, then she might have been even somewhere else when they actually buried her body. But yeah, you can see the tombstone now. It says Highland Mary Price. And then there's a tiny little tombstone on the grass about 3 feet away from it that just says HMP. So that's her actual tomb. Her bones are. But she and her husband, Tom, lived on the street back in the 1880s. And Tom was Hollywood's blacksmith. So this was before the automobile came to Los Angeles or was even invented. So people still rode horses back then. And so horses needed horseshoes. And so you needed a blacksmith. So Tom Price held a smithy shop at their home, which was somewhere along Highland. I think it was probably around Highland and Fountain. And so there is proof that Highland Avenue got its name in 1901, just a few days before Highland Price passed away. The story goes that her neighbor, Mary Mall, had a strawberry field, and when the town founders wanted to run the street through her field, she requested that it be named for her friend Highland Price.
And now she lives on. It's forgotten, associated with going uphill, but now, because of your project, the story's back. We've come now here to Castle Place. Now, I know you said that a lot of these streets that people think have a Hollywood connection to show business do not, but this one actually does?
This one actually does. In fact, in a way, it's the first street that I know of that was named for a silent movie actor, but it was named before she became a silent movie actor. The Castles were a very small family, Rodney and his wife, I can't remember her name right now, but she had a daughter named Dorothy from a previous marriage, and the Castles came to Hollywood in 1911, so Dorothy was just 9 years old at the time. They bought this piece of land. Rodney ran an early garage, but this is the early days of the automobile, and then he passed away And then Dorothy Castle and her mother moved, I think, to Monrovia or parts east. But before she got married, Dorothy Castle dabbled in show business and was an actress. I only know of 2 films that she's credited with, but she had pretty major co-stars. One is a Buster Keaton film, and one is a Harold Lloyd film. The Buster Keaton film is called A Haunted House, and she doesn't appear in the haunted house, but she appears in a rather plum walk-on role early on. It's available on YouTube. You can see she has a very flirtatious moment with Buster Keaton, and there's even a cutaway shot where she's writing her own name, Dorothy Castle, on a piece of paper. He's a bank teller and she's a customer at the bank. So you have rock solid evidence that this was Dorothy Castle. How often does that happen in a silent film? She has a very fleeting moment in a Harold Lloyd film as well. So for whatever reason, she did not continue her silent film career. She was such a sort of forgotten person that we'll never really know why she gave up. If it was because she got married, if it was because she was disillusioned with the industry, it's hard to say. But yes, we do have some surviving films with her beautiful face on it and her charm. And so it is nice that Hollywood does have at least one street that was named after someone who was in the silent movies.
Has doing this changed your opinion of California history, or does this given you a fuller picture about, like Fremont, for example? There's many Fremonts all over California.
Right.
John C. Fremont, the Wayfinder,
Right.
first Republican presidential nominee.
Oh, was he?
Yes, he was.
Interesting.
But he was, not, by modern standards, not a very compassionate person. Let's say that.
Well, I think, so, every once in a while someone will ask me, do you think this street should be renamed because of the awful person that it's named after? And I said, if you went back in time and looked at all these people's private lives and their thoughts, you would have to rename half the streets in the county, because very few of those people would stand up to 21st century standards of decency. But it was a different time. It's like, to me, it's like criticizing cave people or Dark Ages people. It's just, we've learned stuff. So I'm not that invested in having big arguments about, we should rename this street. I'm all for renaming streets for more recent Angelenos who have left their mark and are noble people. I am less enthused about erasing a name of a person and replacing it with another person, but I am a fan of taking a street like Glencoe or some kind of anonymous random street and giving it a name. So instead of Flower Street or even Spring Street. Well, not so much Spring Street, but if something is named Elm Street or whatever, like, get rid of Elm. There's no elms on it. There's no historical aspect to it. But if you want to name it after Venus and Serena Williams, go for it. Have a Venus Street and Serena Street. I think it would be awesome. Great Angelenos. And if you wanted to get rid of 108th and 109th Street in order to do so, I wouldn't have a problem with that.
Can't get rid of 108th Street.
Why not?
The Watts 108th Street Rhythm Band.
Oh, yeah, sorry about that. Well,
that's a big part of that community down there.
Well, that's the thing. It's just like when they tried, there was a city councilman, I think in around 2004, who wanted to rename Crenshaw after Tom Bradley, because George Crenshaw was one of the many, many real estate developers who had racial covenants on his developments, which said that if you're not white, you couldn't buy a house there. They sort of singled him out, but sadly, he was just one of many. But because of this sort of racist connotations that people had with the Crenshaw name, this fellow thought that Tom Bradley Boulevard would sound better. But people, they grew up on Crenshaw. Crenshaw became a name. It became a name to be proud of if you were in that community. And so they said, no, don't get rid of Crenshaw. That's why, to what Adam was asking earlier, about if I've gained a newfound appreciation for walking down the street as opposed to just doing the Google thing. Yeah, absolutely. It changes everything. You can really get a sense of how old any given street is. For a lot of streets that I haven't been able to find images for, I will just take a photo of the sign, and I have kind of a fetish for the old shotgun signs like that one, yes, as opposed to these kind of more boring modernist signs. So I've almost crashed my car a couple times when I find one of those rare shotgun signs. They're not that rare in some neighborhoods, but for some of the major streets like Western Avenue, I almost killed myself doing a U-turn trying to get a photo of the Western Avenue sign in the old shotgun style, but I did it. So yeah, I love those signs. They really take you right back to the 1940s. It's a very noirish quality to them.
Well, this is a very esoteric interest.
It is.
You know, you gotta admit that here.
Well, it is and it isn't. I always say it's not interesting until it is. Everybody lives on a street, everybody works on a street, everybody drives or walks down streets, so we all know these names. We just don't pay attention to them, I guess, because even I was like that for many years. You just sort of assume, oh well, it's named after somebody. Who cares? I don't know. I mean, it's challenging to get people interested in history. You know, you hope that you open a door and you'll get some people to come in and stay and decide that you know what you have to share is worth reading, worth following. But you know, in the end, I'm just happy with the work that I'm doing. I'm having fun with it. And it doesn't matter to me if people like it or not. It's kind of a freeing thing where, you know, in a town run by ego, writing about streets, it's obviously not about me. If you don't want to read about a street, that's not my fault, really. You don't care about the street. It's not, you know, there's no skin off my nose. So it's actually very liberating to just be able to work on this project and not care about, oh, how is this going to affect my career or my status or my standing or will people like me or anything like that. It's just a nice sort of way of saying, look, I'm finding out this information that no one else has taken the time to find out. I'm sharing it with you. This information is now going to be out there, hopefully forever, so that 50 years, 100 years down the line, if someone wants to know about one of these streets, they can find the remnants of the project wherever it might be and trust the information.
What do you think these street names or how they were named, what does that say about Los Angeles as a place, as us as a people who live here?
Well, it does reflect the sort of hodgepodge that is Los Angeles. You know, you go to other cities like Manhattan, for instance, it has a very carefully laid out grid for much of it, you know. But the plethora of personal names sort of attests to the egotism that's always driven development of Los Angeles. Someone wants to leave their name behind. That's always been the case. Now it's the case with show business and so forth. But back with real estate, that was already in place. You had these big dreamers, very aspirational sort of people, very ambitious people who wanted to leave their names behind as they helped build this city. And so these people often led very dramatic lives. So that's what makes it kind of easy to research them, because usually someone whose ego was big enough for him to leave his own name on a street usually lived pretty large and had a lot of scandals and marriages and tragedies and lawsuits and all these other kind of things that you can create a bigger story behind. And I've already forgotten what your actual question was.
I think you answered it.
Okay, good.
Now when I'm driving around LA, I think about our day out with Mark, and I wonder what hidden history remains to be uncovered. What lies behind the street sign, so to speak. I hop on Mark's blog when I'm stuck in traffic and look up whichever street I'm on. It's not a bad way to pass the time when you're going nowhere.